Good afternoon, good morning, Ode Godwin, depending on where you are listening from. We want to continue with part two of the overview of the anatomy and physiology of the nervous system. Last and today we want to intentionally talk about the cerebrum. Cerebrum. Now, we want to say that from the first class we had, we said the central nervous system is divided into two, the brain and the spinal cord. We went further to say that the brain is divided into three, the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And we say the forebrain is divided into three, but the major division of the forebrain is the cerebrum. We even told ourselves in that class that 80% of the total weight of the brain is the cerebrum. And so today we want to say that, want to continue by saying that the cerebrum is located in the upper part of the brain. I want to say it is divided into two cerebral hemispheres. Let's look at this diagram. It is divided into two cerebral hemispheres. Look at the left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere. It is divided into two by the longitudinal fissure. Look at it here, longitudinal fissure. That's what divides the right and the left cerebral hemisphere. And I want to say that this right cerebral hemisphere is connected to the left cerebral hemisphere by a thick band of nerve fiber, called the corpus callosum. Let us look at the corpus callosum. Look at it here. This is what we call the corpus callosum. This is what link or connects the right cerebral hemisphere to the left cerebral hemisphere. Let us continue with this. So remember, we say it is divided into two by the longitudinal fissure. Now I want to go further to say that the right cerebral hemisphere control the left side of the body. Right cerebral hemisphere control the left side of the body. I want to say that the right cerebral hemisphere is associated with creativity, with a spatial ability, and with artistic skills. So those three functions are meant for the right cerebral hemisphere. Why the left cerebral hemisphere? This is the left side. The left cerebral hemisphere control the right side of the body. It controls the right side of the body and is associated with language, with logic, with analytic thinking. This is responsible for what? Language, logic, and analytic thinking. While the right is responsible for what? The right is responsible for creativity, spatial ability, and artistic skills. Okay, that is for the two hemisphere. Want to say, okay, there are another special features that are found on this surface of the cerebrum. Some important features. Number one is called the gyri. Now, if when it is much, you call it gyri, but when it is singular, we call it the gyrus. So that's why you are seeing them here calling it gyrus. And what are the gyrus? Want to say they are the raised ridges or folds on the surface of the cerebrum. Folds on the surface of the cerebrum. You can see it here. Look at this fold. Look at another fold here. Look at another fold. Look at another fold. You can see all the fold everywhere. These are called the gyri if you are talking about them in plural terms, but in singular term we call it the gyrus. Then another feature again on this surface is the sulci, or you call it the sulcus when you are talking about singular, the sulcus. Now, what are the sulcus? We want to say they are the shallow grooves between gyri, the shallow grooves between gyri. You can look at it here. These are the shallow grooves. You can see them, the shallow grooves between the gyri. So these are what we call the sulcis or sulcus. All right. Then another important one is called the fissures. Why the sulcus is the shallow grooves, the fissures are the deep grooves. And one of the deep grooves, you remember, is the one that divides the hemisphere into right and left. Another place again you find the fissures are the one that divides the cerebrum into lobes. So we can see them at this place, at this parental lobes. We can see them here again at this temporal lobe. We can see them again at this where what divides the frontal from the parental lobe. That is, those are the places we can see the fissures. So we see fissures at that division where you have the division of the lobes. I will also see it where you divide the cerebrum into two hemispheres. So those are the important fissures we want to look at. Now, another important thing again we would see at this you see on this cerebrum is the lobes. Is the lobes. We want to say that the cerebrum. Each lobe is divided into, that's each hemisphere. Remember, we say this is divided into two hemispheres, right? The left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere. Now, each of these cerebral hemisphere, whether the right cerebral hemisphere or the left cerebral hemisphere, each of them is divided into how many lobes? They have how many lobes? They have four main lobes and with specific function. Four main lobes with specific function. Number one is the frontal. Look at the frontal here. This is the frontal lobes. We have it here. We also have it here. Is that okay? We have it here. We have it here. So that's what we call the frontal lobe. Now the frontal lobe, which is at the front part of the brain, is responsible for voluntary motor control. It is also responsible for reasoning. It is also responsible for planning, for speech, for speech production, which is controlled by the Broca's area, and then also for personality. It is responsible for personality trait, and then it is also responsible for problem solving. So the frontal is responsible for problem solving. It is responsible for personality, for speech production, for planning, for reasoning, for motor, that's a voluntary motor control. And then the second one is the parental. Look at it here, the parental. This is called the parental. I want to say that the parental is found behind the frontal lobe. It is found behind the frontal lobe and it is responsible for sensory perception like touch, like temperature, like pain, spatial orientation. Then we have the temporal. Look at it here, the temporal. This is called the temporal. I want to say it is found below the frontal and the parental lobe. Below the frontal and the temporal and the parental lobe. That is where you find the temporal lobe. And it is responsible for auditory processing. It is responsible for auditory processing. It is responsible for memory, for language, for comprehension, language comprehension, and the language comprehension particularly is handled by the Wernicke's area, and then it's also responsible for emotions. Then the last lobe is called the occipital lobe. This is the occipital lobe that is found at the back of the brain. Occipital lobe is found at the back of the brain and it is responsible for visual processing. It is responsible for visual processing. Okay, also want to say that this lobe, it is also collectively, we call them the outer layer of the cerebrum, which we call the cerebral cortex. The outer layer of the cerebrum. Want to say it is about 2 to 5 millimeter thick. That the cerebral cortex is about 2 to 4 millimeter thick. Want to say that the cerebral cortex is composed of gray matter. Is composed of gray matter. When we say gray matter, we are saying that it has a cell bodies and they are responsible for higher brain functions like consciousness, like thought, emotion, reasoning, language, and memory. Then we also have the white matter. The white matter is located beneath the cerebral cortex. White matter is located beneath the cerebral cortex, and it is composed of myelinated axons. While the white matter is made up of cell bodies, that is, the gray matter is made up of cell bodies, the white matter is made up of myelinated axons that connect different parts of the brain and the spinal cord, and it includes important fibers like the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is part of the white matter. Okay, another image was in this diagram. Okay, it is not there, but let us remember about what. So we say these lobes we see here are the cerebral cortex. So the frontal, the parental, the temporal, the occipital, all of them are the cerebral cortex, and the outer layer is of gray matter, while the inner is of the white matter. The outer, which is the cell body, is made up of cell body, which is gray matter. The inner, which is white matter, is made up of myelinated axons. And we say example of this white matter is this corpus callosum, which is a nerve fiber network, or which is a big nerve. Look at it here. It's made up of great nerve that links the two cerebral hemisphere together. Okay, so we have the basal ganglion. The basal ganglion. We want to say that they are clusters of gray matter. The basal ganglion are clusters of gray matter found within the cerebrum. Found within the cerebrum. They involve in the regulation of voluntary motor movement, procedural learning, and also they are responsible for routine behavior. They are responsible for routine behavior. Okay, so that is what we know about the cerebrum. This is what we know about the cerebrum. But let us look at the physiology, which is not captured in the anatomy that we have discussed now. Let us look at the anatomy, the physiology. I want to say that the cerebrum is responsible for integrating sensory information, initiating voluntary motor activity, and then enabling complex cognitive function. So let's start with each of them. So those are the three things we'll look at this in the physiology of the cerebrum. Number one is that we say they are responsible for what? Sensory information. So let's look at the sensory function of the cerebrum. Sensory function of the cerebrum. Want to say that the primary somatosensory cortex, which is known as the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus of the parental lobe. So we can see it around here. Of the parental lobe receives and process sensory input from the body, such as what? Touch, such as what? Pressure, pain, and temperature. Now, other sensory areas like visual, auditory, olfactory, and gustatory information are also processed by the primary somatosensory cortex. The second function we talk about is the motor function, and the primary motor cortex, which is located in the pre-central gyrus of the frontal lobe. In this case now, it is at the frontal lobe here. That is where you see the primary motor cortex. Remember, we say for the primary somatosensory cortex is found at the postcentral gyrus of the parental lobe. This one is at the parental lobe, while the one of the primary motor cortex is at the frontal lobe, and they control voluntary muscle movement. Yeah, motor commands are sent centrally or centralaterally, or they are sent through the right hemisphere and they control the left side of the body, and then vice versa. So motor movement of the control of the primary motor cortex, the right hemisphere control the left side of the body, and the left side of the body control the right side of the body. I want to also say that the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor area assist in planning and coordinating movement. Then lastly but not the least, remember we say the third physiological function of the cerebrum is we say it's what again? We say it controls. Is that what we say? No. We say they enable complex cognitive functions. So what are those complex cognitive functions that are primary responsibility of the cerebrum? One of them is language. And remember we say the Broca's area, which is found at the frontal lobe, especially the left hemisphere, which we told you before that the left hemisphere is responsible for language. So in this case now, it is called the Broca's area, which is at the frontal lobe, and particularly the left cerebral hemisphere. We say they control speech production, while the Wernicke's area, which is found at the temporal lobe, it is found at the temporal lobe, again at the left cerebral hemisphere, is responsible for language comprehension, while the Broca's area is responsible for speech production. The Wernicke's area is responsible for language comprehension. Another important another important and complex cognitive function. Another important complex cognitive function is memory and learning. The cerebrum is also responsible for memory and learning. I want to say particularly the temporal lobe. And which part of the temporal lobe again? Especially the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system, which is part of the limbic system. In the temporal lobe, particularly the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system, they play critical role in forming and retrieving memories. They form and retrieve memories, and the cerebrum integrate new informations and store long-term memories. The cerebrum store long-term memory. Another cognitive function of the cerebrum is emotions and behavior. Emotions and behavior. Want to say the cerebrum work with the limbic system to regulate emotions, motivation, and behavior. I repeat again that together with the limbic system and the cerebrum, they regulate what? Emotions, motivation, and behavior.